Father Simon and the Confessing Mutual. As a reformed, is a winning opening sentence. As a reformed Scottish Presbyterian church minister,
Here we go.
I have to admit a bit of unease at asking from forgiveness from anyone but our good Lord. But hey, if it gets me on the radio, and more, but more importantly, a bit of peace, I'll give it a try. This is the Reverend Gary here, Scottish Presbyterian church minister, asking us for forgiveness. My tale goes back long before ordination to when I was a teenager in the 80s. I was working hard for my bronze Duke of Edinburgh award in the Scouts in Ayrshire. Part of the award was demonstrating a skill of some sort or other, and I was wondering what to do. Then I remembered that a few years before I had, despite showing absolutely no musical talent at all, had somehow managed to convince my mother that piano lessons would be a good idea. Being a good mum, she consulted friends, and a piano tutor was sourced and a trial lesson booked. I do confess to being a little shy in those days, so my mother came along with me to the first lesson, which took place in the piano teacher's house. It was there that I got my first experience of Mrs. Van Straten. She was an elderly lady, but with a strangely fine head of black hair. And when we first arrived, she was finishing off the previous lesson. As some unfortunate teenager finished her lesson, Mrs. Van Straten, who I'd come to learn was a rather strict, foreboding and sometimes fierce tutor in a kind of Miss Jean Brodie style, was playing to the gallery, basically me and my mum. As she barked instructions to this girl, she was also delighting in asking us loads of questions. More of an interrogation, really. Question number 3 on her list was, "What kind of piano do you have?" I immediately looked at my feet and my mother mumbled sheepishly, "Well, we don't actually have a piano." I thought Mrs. Van Straten was going to explode, but my mother eventually calmed her down, explaining that we would get one if I enjoyed the lessons, and that in the meantime we had an arrangement with our church that I could practice on their piano. So there you go. It's a perfect, really, really perfect answer for Mrs. Van Straten there. Despite this poor start, the rest of the lesson went well, and it was agreed that I would indeed start weekly tuition. And so began several years of terrifying and in many ways fruitless lessons as Mrs. Van Straten tried to turn a talentless musician like me into some sort of piano prodigy. I think it dawned on her pretty quickly that this lump of coal was never going to be a diamond, as I often murdered the various pieces that she gave me. However, the upside for me was that several years later, when I was looking for a skill to do for my Duke of Edinburgh award, I was able to faithfully log my lessons, which were then helping me towards meeting all the requirements for the Bronze Award. Many months later, I was beside myself with excitement when I was told that I had met all the requirements for the Bronze DOE and that I was to be presented with the badge and certificate during one of our Scout meetings on a Friday night. I was also told that I could invite some guests who had helped me in my achievement. Well, obviously my long-suffering parents, who'd put up with my intolerable practicing, would have to be invited. And as I thought who else might swell with pride as I collected my award, in a moment of graciousness, I thought about Mrs. Van Straten. So the invites were sent, and I was delighted when she told me at the next lesson that she would love to attend and that she also accepted the offer of a lift from my parents. The day arrived, and it was a cold and very wet, dark evening when I turned up at our scout hut in my perfectly ironed uniform. When the allotted time came for the guests to file from the pre-award drinks upstairs, I anxiously scanned the room to see where my parents and Mrs. Van Straten would be sitting. As I looked around, I could only see my mother sitting there, and as I caught her eye, she proceeded to shake her head in a very serious manner. In italics, that, by the way.
Wow.
How you shake your head.
Because I don't know how badly this is going to go wrong. It's not apparent yet, but
It's not.
I believe
It's one of those
going to
we
be.
think, I've got no idea.
Poor old Gary.
Not knowing what she meant, I took my place in the line of other scouts awaiting their awards. After the ceremony, I rushed over to see my mum, who had then been joined by my rather flustered father, and I asked where Mrs. Van Straten was. This is the point, Father Simon, where I need to tell you that our scout hut used to be at the top of a small hill at the end of a rather dark street. The hall had no car park, and spaces directly outside the hall were at a premium. A pavement ran up the street to the hall but stopped there and was replaced by a grass verge that ran up the rest of the hill. You've got a map there. As I excitedly waited for the invited guests to arrive, it transpired that my father had arrived and tried to park his car as close to the hall as possible to save Mrs. Van Straten walking too far in the now torrential rain. He gallantly turned the car and parked her next to the grass verge on the same side as the hall. What he didn't notice was the rather large hole that an electricity company had dug and subsequently failed to illuminate or fence off. So as his car came to a stop, Mrs. Van Straten opened the door, stepped out, and like she's in a cartoon, fell directly into a large 6-foot-deep, pitch-dark, muddy hole. It took quite a few minutes for my father in the dark to work out where she'd gone.
Dear.
Mrs. Van Straten. Took many more minutes for him to retrieve the rather bewildered, muddy and extremely soggy piano teacher from said hole. Being rather unimpressed with the whole situation, as it were, she switched into Miss Jean Brodie mode and demanded to be taken home immediately, hence her absence from the award ceremony. Father Simon, I seek forgiveness not for myself and not from Mrs. Van Straten, as she was not the most pleasant of people, but rather I seek absolution for my poor father, who not only had to retrieve a rather soggy Mrs. Van Straten from the bottom of a 6-foot muddy hole, but who, after he finally managed to bundle her back into the car, noticed that she was now bald, and he had to go back into the hole, which was, as I mentioned, dark and rather muddy.
To get the ferret. Yeah.
To get the black wig. He's never told me what Mrs. Van Straten said to him on the car journey back, but he still twitches whenever her name is mentioned. And amazingly, the subject was never brought up again at any future lessons. But Gary, think of all the sermons that you can get out of that as you preach there for the Scottish Presbyterian churches. So there you go. It was one of those stories where I got to a page and a half and still you would have had no idea where that was heading. And indeed, neither did Mrs. Van Straten know exactly where she was heading, because the answer was down a 6-foot hole. What do you say there, Bobby?
Oh, poor lady. I feel really sorry for her. You know, she's taken out on a night out, and it's actually good of her to attend one of her pupils, not one of her star pupils. I mean, I wasn't sure whether he was going to do a kind of a bit of a play for her, and she would have been embarrassed. I thought it was going in a completely different direction. Playing the piano.
Sorry.
You're looking at me strangely.
What are you talking about?
Oh, no, it's he was part of her music.
He went,
completely honest.
He went to stroke her hair passionately, and oops.
Anyway, no. Anyway, I think this is no one's fault. I think it's an accident. I think it's unfortunate. I don't think I look outside the car if I get out of a passenger's door and look down. It's unfortunate. It's a series of unfortunate accidents, and it seems to me that, Gary, that your dad kept it a secret about her not having her own hair. Well, maybe not having much hair. You're forgiven.
A series of unfortunate events. Novice, what do you say?
So, on a point of clarification, is he a Reformed Scottish Presbyterian, as he no longer is, or was it the Scottish Reformed Church?
I think it's the church that's reformed. I don't think he's... I don't think he means he's seen the error of his ways.
No, I wasn't sure. I wasn't decided to become agnostic or something.
I don't think the theology matters too much.
Right. Now, I was
we
all
could do
right
that on
with
the
this
show tomorrow, couldn't we? The divisions in the church, the Protestant church in Scotland.
Oh, no, I've turned my back on them.
You don't need to comment. Go on.
When he said that she wasn't the most pleasant of people, so I don't know why Gary actually even asked her. I actually had a similar to a Mrs. Van Straten in my life, Nigel Horsfall. I had to listen for years to me plinketing the ivories, and it's not much fun listening to people who obviously got very little talent, and Gary hadn't got that in that department. He did ask her, that was nice. The grass verger on this occasion, Gary, I'm forgiving you.
If you're forgiving him,
yes,
what do you say?
I'm forgiving him.
I think this story basically depends on how you feel towards Mrs. Van Straten, and there will be lots who have sympathy with her. I somewhat took against her quite a bit for no reason other than probably the name. I don't know why, but and so really she should have been looking where she's going. You've got to look where you're going. We all know that's Room 101. Look where you're going. So is it all her fault? Maybe not, but probably yes, it is. So let's say definitely forgiven.
Hey!